Okay, today we're going to talk about game design documentation, and that's really what we're going to focus on this week as a whole. Um, it's really one of the most important things that designers do in an organization, and if you find yourself in a large developer like an EA or something like that, you'll find that your job um, a lot of your job revolves around your documentation and really kind of how you're judged as a designer is based on the quality of your documentation. So it's an important thing to kind of get out of the way right first, right? The common conception of what game documentation is that it's this kind of Bible or Rosetta Stone uh, of all the things that are going to go on in the game, and a designer sits down, puts pen to paper, and here's this masterpiece at the end that is the game design document. And that's generally not how it works in practice. Uh, that's a very kind of naive outside of the industry view. And now in this lecture and in next lecture, we're going to kind of talk about uh, how to not fall into that trap and how to kind of make documentation that actually works for your team and isn't just kind of an expression of your desires as a designer. Uh, this guy's Damian Schubert. He's one of the lead designers on Star Wars: The Old Republic, and he's been an MMO guy for many years. Worked on Meridian and some other things, I believe. Um, EverQuest too, I think. I can't remember. I mean, you can Google him and find out. His name's Damian Schubert, but I believe it was at the 2008 Game Developers Conference. I saw a wonderful talk from him about writing game design documents. And a lot of the things from this presentation will be derived from that. And if you go to his website, he has a bunch of slides from that presentation. His website is zenofdesign.com. And you can find presentations that he's given on a bunch of different things. But I thought this was very useful. So um, the things that I talk about here are in part derived from that. So going back to the kind of book of ideas is something that Damien mentions in his presentation. Only this kind of model he calls the Big Book of Stupid, and that comes from an experience he had with a group where the design wasn't working, and they fired a bunch of people, then brought some new people, including him, in, and the engineers were working from this massive tome of documentation that really didn't come to terms with what the team needed or wasn't internally consistent, and so the engineers ended up calling it the Big Book of Stupid because there were a lot of answers in there, but they weren't to the questions that they were looking for. And so what you're doing in writing game design documentation is that you want to avoid the Big Book of Stupid. And those three words are kind of what you want to avoid. Big, you want to avoid. You want it to be short and concise and to the point. Book, you're not writing a book. You're not writing a story. It's something completely different, and that's what we're going to talk about in a little bit. And stupid, it has to apply and speak to people that are. It has to answer the questions that are being asked. Uh, it can't just be writing for the sake of writing, this kind of stream of consciousness design that a lot of designers end up taking. So um, this is kind of what you want to avoid, and we're going to talk a little bit about how you get there. But first, you have to answer the question of who it's for. And so game designers often have a hard time kind of enumerating this, of answering this question. Who is the game design documentation for? Isn't it obvious? You just write it and it becomes part of the game, which isn't the case, right? So there's numerous stakeholders in there. There's the artists, there's the engineers, there's the producers, there's the businessmen, there's the other designers on your project, there's the QA team. There's a lot of people that this game design documentation is for. And last week when we talked about the different roles that there were in game design and game development rather, we mentioned that these could all be the same person. These can be multiple people. In the corporate environment, these are usually multiple people. Um, but you really have to ask yourself, who am I writing this for? Now, if the answer to that question is all of these people, well, then you have to somehow manage to write in such a way that it addresses the questions of all these different people. But these people have various different questions, right? Other designers will say, how do I interface this with my systems that I'm working on? QA will say, how do I test it to know that it's then it's done, that it's ready to go. Engineering will say, hey, how do I make the damn thing? What am I making? Business people will say, well, who is this targeting? What is this? What is this for? Right? And producers will say, well, what's the scope of this? How big is this? What can I do? And it goes on with the number of stakeholders that you have. And Damian Schubert's answer to this, which is how I've answered this in the past, is that it's really for engineers, right? The game design document is a way to document to the engineers, what are they going to make? What are they working on? And engineers think very much like this screen, right? They think very much in terms of procedures and of kind of the logical progression of instructions. And that's how your game design should be written. If it's a big book of stupid, like we've mentioned before, it's very hard for them to turn big book of stupid into code. That's why when you write a game design document, it should be formatted in the way that the engineers can most easily turn it into code, and that's writing in a very procedural and very I don't want to say pseudocode because it's not really pseudocode, but writing in a way that's easily transferable to code. And so something like this here is saying, okay, I'm going to tell the engineer how to join the map. Now I could have done this with 2 or 3 paragraphs of blocks of text, but instead I chose to do it in a very chunked method, right? It's ordered, right? So I probably could have done it with numbers instead of hyphens as the bullet points, but I didn't here. But it's very much one sentence is an instruction. It's check to see if the map's full. Okay, that's a kind of instruction. If so, okay, there's a conditional. Show the map full error, and then I have a reference outside to say, okay, to see more about this, see it here's another document that talks about it, rather than repeating it here. So this helps solve a lot of problems with game design documentation. That one, it's usually too big, right? Big book of stupid, and two, it doesn't speak to the people that need to be addressed, and that's really the people that are making the game. And so when we talk about game design documentation in specifics, that's what we want. We want someone to tell you what is the game, period. And if it looks like this, it's going to be easier for the engineers to be able to turn it into something that you can hold and touch and play and interact with. I had an engineer in my last development job that would constantly come to me and ask me things that I thought were very simple questions of, how many points does this thing have? What happens when I click this other thing? And I would say, oh, well, that's in this section of the game design document. That's in that section of the game design document. And one day he just frankly said, you know what, I just don't read the game design document. And I said, well, why? Right? I mean, that's the point. I'm making it so that you know what to do, so you don't have to get up and walk across the studio and come ask me these things or type them in IM or email or whatever. And his answer was just that, you know what, it's always changing and it's never kept up to date, and it's hard to read, and all these other things that are common across the industry of really bad game design document practices. And so I answered his questions, but I assured him that my documentation would answer his questions better, and that I would do a better job of it. But you'll see that it's when you get into industry that it's particularly endemic that people write bad design documents. And so if you're able to write good design documents, then you're going to have a better rapport with your engineers who can get stuff done for you. So let's go forward here. Schubert in his talk said he did a survey of all the engineers that he was working with and of what they want to see in game design documentation. And the 3 points that came up time and time again were these 3. That it should be short, that engineers are extremely busy, they're very crunched for time. When you look at Slack resources in a game development studio, the engineers are the ones that are usually the constraint, that are scheduled the tightest, that they're scheduled for 45 hours a week or 50 hours a week or whatever, and there's really no room for them to kind of relax and muck around with stuff. So they want short documentation. They want to get in there and understand exactly what they have to do, and be able to get into the code and do their job. They don't want this long, flowery prose that explains everything. They just want something that's simple. And the second one is explanatory, that it explains exactly what the system is, and that's it. You know, that tells them exactly what they need to do. And they want it to be up to date. That one of the problems with gigantic documentation that's hundreds of pages is that when things change, it takes a lot of work to keep it up to date. And so a lot of designers just don't do it. They say, you know, that's the old design document, whatever, we're not working with that anymore, rather than keeping some form of documentation that's up to date. And you can understand the problems that would happen from that is that, you know, new engineers to the project or transferred engineers would come in and they would read documentation and they would start to craft systems around these things that aren't what the rest of the team wants it to do. So and this is a very wide problem around the industry, is that game design documentation is not kept up to date. So if you keep your document short and explanatory, that makes it easier to keep up to date because there's less text and less moving parts to really keep up to date. So you want to be able to do these three things to make your engineers happy. Now, we're talking about game design documents here, and that's a term that's very floated around when there's really two types of game design documentation. There's the game design document, which is what we were talking about now, and then there's a design overview or feature pitch. Now, a lot of times, and you'll see this even in the professors here in the program, that they call the design overview or feature pitch or things like that, they call that the game design document. And even in industry, we have a problem with this nomenclature of what the difference is. And a lot of business types and producer types want these to be one thing, but they provide two very different, they serve two different purposes, right? So a game design document is explanatory. It's, you know, just, this is a picture of Joe Friday, right? Just the facts, right, from Dragnet. You want to know what it is, and I want to get in and get out, and just tell me what I'm going to make. Whereas the design overview or feature pitch is something that you're saying, well, this is what we want to make, tell me what you think. And that's very useful for, say, pitching to investors or publishers or business people, other arms of your organization or something like that, of saying this is the kind of thing that we're thinking about making, and this is why, and this is, you know, the market comparables and things like that. And these are two very different documents, right? If an engineer got the persuasive document that says, you know, we want to make a fighting game and it's going to be pretty cool, it's going to have 16 characters or whatever, it doesn't tell them what to make, it gives them kind of an overview of what the ideas are, but it doesn't say, you know, this character will be this many pixels high and this, you know, he'll have this many attack things. And these are things that the engineers need to know to make the thing, but the explanatory side, or rather, the side that's higher up, that's an overview, that's meant to persuade somebody into saying, okay, I understand your idea now. But that's a completely different document. So it's very important to understand which kind of document you're being asked to make. And many places will call both things a game design document. So instead of asking them which they would rather have, a game design document or a design overview, kind of understand what they want from you, whether they want something that's explanatory, that's we'll do this, then we'll do that, then we'll do the other thing, that's very rules based, or whether they want something that's more of an overview, that's more persuasive. And so, you know, the explanatory is tell me what we will do, and the persuasive is tell me what you want to do. And you'll see that's a very different paradigm in documentation. So the design overview and the feature pitch has very little limitations on it. It's just to be persuasive. And when we talk about pitching in 2 weeks, we're going to talk about that, about techniques on kind of how to persuade and how to best present ideas. This week we're going to stick towards the game design document of this is telling your team exactly what they're going to make, and that's what we want to focus on. So who cares, right? You know, what's the big deal? Why are we making such a difference? I've even seen other designers say, well, you know, I'm going to put all this stuff in the document anyway, and they can, you know, they can figure it out. They can sort out what they need. If everything's there, then I'm not missing anything, right? And that's kind of a big no-no, right? Who cares is the engineers care. The people that are actually making your game, the people that you have to take care of to best realize your vision, they certainly care, right? They want to be able to they want you to help sustain their ability to make a great game, and they're counting on you to do that. If you give them poor documentation, then they're just going to have to start making up things to fill in the blanks, or they're going to spend a lot more time on certain features uh, and give you less time to test and make changes to those things. So, in the efforts of the team, it's best that you work really hard at this. So there are a bunch of no-nos, right, of things that you don't want to do in a design document. And I'm going to go through those right here very briefly. But as long as you keep the idea that you know who this document's for and you know its purpose, you know that it's for the people making the game, and you know that its purpose is to instruct them on what to make in the game, then these things just kind of follow. They just end up being common sense. But I figured I would go through and kind of get some of the um, more commonly made mistakes by me and others that I've seen in my time. So one of the big problems we see is sitting on the fence. And that's where the designer gives an instruction but is vague about it. So using phrases like I've listed here where I say, we're thinking about adding a trading system. Or you can go 1 to 3 steps, we'll figure that out later. These things aren't helpful to people making the game. If you say we're thinking about making a trading system, well, okay, do I go in and start building the architecture to make this trading system or don't I? In that case, you're adding more questions than you are answering, and it's not helpful to the people that are actually trying to make the game. In a design overview, you can probably do that kind of stuff. You can say there might be a trading system, and when we figure out how much time we have or how much money we have, we're going to make that call. But in the game design document, you don't want to do that because it causes if it's anything that causes an engineer or an artist to get up and walk over your desk and ask you a question, then it's a problem. Uh, so this one's a lot harder to take out because it's not incredibly obvious at the time. But often in the corporate environment or even in small teams, you get these ideas and you're really excited about them, uh, and then you start building the game, and other things become more important. They become priorities, and these ideas get pushed back. Um, Essentially, they're abandoned. And when they're abandoned, you want to take them out of the game design documents because they're not something that needs to be supported anymore. If an engineer is making a system over here and he reads all the design documentation and he sees this gigantic huge system that we ended up cutting, he's going to have to know, okay, I don't need to make all the links to this or build a bunch of code to support this because it's not going to be in the game. So often you need to be very vigilant about reading the game design documentation all the time and taking out the things that aren't going to be made. And then tangentially to this, anything that won't actually be in the game, instructions that aren't directly to the engineers or artists that are writing the code and making the art about this. So uh, things like how can I put this? Uh, Things that aren't exactly instructions on what to put in the game need to be left out of the game design document. So if I say, there's going to be a cutscene and it's going to make the user feel sad or something like that. Okay, well that's certainly good advice, but how is it going to do that? Where instead I should be listing, the main character's best friend is going to die and this and that and the other thing. Uh, Unless the artists and engineers have the ability to make those decisions to interpret that as something to put in the game, um, then it's a different story. But in any other case, if the engineer is spending brain cycles trying to figure out what you mean or what exactly he needs to make, then that's a no-go. That's something that you don't need in the game design document proper. So anything that won't be in the game, write out. We talked about this right at the beginning with the Big Book of Stupid. One of the major problems of it is that it's big, it's long, there's walls of text, and some people write like this, and some other people don't. It seems to be a personality thing, where somebody writes big chunking paragraphs of text rather than breaking things up into kind of ordered lists. And ordered lists seem to go over well with engineers. Um, Big, just blocks of text are very difficult to skim. Often, engineers end up skimming game design documents to find exactly where they need to start, because game design documents can sometimes span multiple features or multiple parts of a game. So you want something that's very easy to scan and read, and big blocks of text don't do that. Big blocks of text are very good for writing stories and things where you know you're going to start at word 1 and you're going to end at word 255 or whatever. Um, but big blocks of text aren't good for skimming and understanding partial bits of the document. So you want to keep it away from being long. And out of date, we already talked about that a little bit. But if something just doesn't apply to anymore, then it needs to be completely excised from the game design documentation. You can't have things be out of date, because when new people drop in, they need to be able to know exactly what is the plan of being made. That's the whole point of the game design documentation. Jesse Schell in his book gives two reasons for game design documentation. One is that memory is really frail. Our short-term memory is extremely frail, and our long-term memory isn't that much better. So it serves as a way of remembering the things that we talked about, and it also serves as a way of documenting just the consensus of what the something the team can point to and say, yes, I agree with that, rather than just this kind of telephone game where everybody's telling somebody else a little bit different version of it, and when it gets to be the end, nobody agrees that this is what we had talked about in the first place. And so when you keep out-of-date documentation around, it goes against both those purposes, because it's something that we don't need to remember, and it's inaccurate. It's essentially a lie to your engineers, saying, we're going to make this thing. Oh wait, it's out of date. Everything you did just is useless. And this is the big one, and it's harder to get a real grip of when you haven't been in the industry or where you haven't been making games, which is kind of a really good reason to start making games, right? Is to know when something is out of scope. If I'm writing in a game design document for a feature that's only that is very minor in our game, I have to know to create that game design documentation to reflect the level of complexity of the items that we're going to put in the game. So if you look at something like Spore's Creature Creator, right? If you played Spore, then you're one of a few, I guess, but if you played Spore, you know that it has just a remarkably revolutionary creature creator that you can go in and basically anything that you can think of, you can make a creature out of it, and it'll animate correctly for the most part, and you can put any sort of little doodads of any sort of alien limbs and appendages and eyeballs and all kinds of things you can put in there. Now, that took up a huge part of Spore's development cycle, being able to basically create anything that you can imagine. If I'm making, say, a space RPG like a Mass Effect or whatever, and I have a character creator in that, the character creator in that is not going to be as expansive as the one in Spore, right? It's going to say, okay, I have a few different skin types and a few different facial shapes and some hair, and you're just going to use some sliders. It's not going to be this big drag and drop interface like it is in Spore. So if you went into the design documentation creating basically the Spore creature creator for Mass Effect, the engineers are going to be totally freaked out by this, right? It's something that requires a lot more work than needs to be done, and this is something that engineers just generally take in stride and say, okay, I got a problem now, I got to figure out how to fix it. But you can solve that problem for them by scoping the features appropriately. One thing that I see students do time and again when they're pitching projects, say, other professors are sharing them with us, when teams are pitching game projects, they're always like, okay, well, it's going to have this epic story that spans 20 hours and really kind of best-of-class voice acting and animation and cutscenes. and then it's going to have this multiplayer, and the multiplayer is just it's going to beat Call of Duty's pants, and it's going to be great, and it's going to have microtransactions and this huge support system and all this scripting and everything, and it's going to be appropriate for all age brackets and be and you know hopefully target a 95 Metacritic and win all these awards. And that's a great it's a great goal to have, right? But in reality, you have constraints. You have an amount of time and amount of money that you can spend on this project before it releases. And so that's why you see some teams focusing only on one side, only on the single player, only on the multiplayer. Or, if you're LA Noire or something like that, they focus greatly on this facial recognition software so that they could get the motion capture of all the actors that they wanted to have in the game. So certain things can have this huge best of class scope as long as you compensate for that by narrowing the scope of other things. And being able to cut that shows a lot of maturity in design. Being able to say, this is all we need for that. It doesn't need to be the best of class. We're going to save our resources for something else. And that's something that's tough to learn, especially right now as you are students. But it's something that's absolutely important to note in your game design documents is this the right level? Is this as simple as it can be, right? Is this or as simple as it needs to be? And that's usually a tough question to answer because if you surveyed probably 90% of designers out there in the industry would say, yeah, I probably over-design. I probably make things a little too big than they need to be. This is something that happens a lot in established studios. They have these templates for GDDs. And I get students all the time asking me, can you send me a template of a GDD so I know kind of how it works? And I say, well, you don't really want templates for GDDs because every project and every team is going to have a different way of using them. So this is kind of an example that I made based on my experiences at EA, where they had for a long time, and they don't anymore. A long time they had this kind of massive template that they used for doing game design documentations, and it had page after page of empty sections that just don't matter to the GDD. And if you take a look at this kind of example that I have here of the design of this feature is just that when the network throws an error, we're going to take the user back to the main menu. That is right there in red. That is the whole game design document that really needs to be there. All this other stuff down here is just empty sections. There's no art for it, so we don't need an art resources. There are no previous versions, so we don't need an approval section. The test cases are trivially simple. They don't really need a section about test cases. Yet in some studios, they make sure that you have a section for art, a section for sound, and a section for approvals, and a section for QA. And if you're an engineer opening this up, you're going, oh God, there's 12 pages of these empty sections. How am I going to find what I need to find? And if you find yourself asking that, then you probably have too many sections in your game design document. So if there's any sort of area that's trivial or completely empty, you need to get rid of it. This game design document literally needs to be this red section and everything above it. Just the title, the contact, and the design. And then all this other stuff below it is useless, right? And this is the pointy-haired boss from Dilbert, and you find this with a lot of people that have experience as an engineer that become a designer or producer. Often this isn't the case with students, but I bring it up because it happens a lot in the industry, where the designs will go so specific, where they will say, I'm going to tell you, not only am I going to tell you what to make, I'm going to tell you how to make it. And that's not your job, right? Your job is to tell them what to make. So in this case, we're telling the engineer the best way to store variables when it's the engineer's job to figure out what the best way to store variables are. You just want the end result of that. And so what I don't see, I see this sometimes in the real world, but what I see in the real world more often is another version of this. And that's where designers tell the artists what to make. And so instead of saying, I'm going to use this technical jargon of multi-dimensional array, instead of that, I'm going to make a diagram that's way too specific. And so this is an example that I have in my book of a completely non-specific image for documentation. In this, it's so trivially simple. I made it in MS Paint, right? It's so trivially simple, but it answers the questions that the designers need to know. Okay, there's fireworks in the background, and I would explain it too because it really doesn't look like fireworks because it's such crap. But they know exactly where on the, where's my cursor? I lost my cursor. They know exactly where on the image things are supposed to go, and then they will apply their expertise at designing UI, their expertise at choosing fonts and layout, to make this look like something that you would ship. You would never ship something this ugly. This is stupid. Okay, in the industry, we generally call this designer art, and programmers call theirs programmer art. But this is the idea. I've told the artist, okay, I want I want the summary of who got what points down at the bottom, and I want a picture of the top 3 people. I want some fireworks in the background and the time remaining and a continue button up here. And then they'll theme it in the way that works for them. They will figure out how to do it. You tell them what to do. And it's no different from this multidimensional array stuff where you say, I want you to store this player information, which is this stuff down here, player ID, nickname, level. You tell them that. Don't tell them how to store it. And in the same way, tell them what they want to tell the artist, what you want the end result to be, and they'll figure out how to get there. At the end of the day, though, most game design documentation is about common sense, right? It's about, as long as you understand that who you're making this document for and what purpose it serves, then the rest of the stuff just comes easy. It's looking for things that make the document hard to read. It's looking for things that are kind of artifacts of the printed word, right? Since game design, if you remember last week, I showed you the picture of the big red button, and I said that, the button that says press this button and the princess is saved would be the worst game ever. And that's because game design is iterative and there's a little bit of mystery to it. And in that sense, you have to keep your design documentation flexible because you're going to be changing it all the time. You're going to be iterating on these designs. And so anything that kind of harkens back to the big book of stupid, right, is bad. You're not going to be printing out game design documents because they're supposed to change every time you make a new build. You're going to figure out ways to make things better, and you're going to figure out, okay, this thing works and this thing doesn't work, and I want to change that. And your design should reflect that. It should be flexible. If you print it, then it's etched into paper, right? It stays put. So things that make sense on a printed page for a document just don't make sense for a game design document. So if you have things like page numbers, right? Do page numbers make a lot of sense in a game design document? Well, sometimes, right? If it's a big document where you need to be able to scroll through a long way to reach the end, then yeah, maybe page numbers make sense because it's a 400-page document and the section that the engineer cares about, according to the table of contents, starts at page 272. Okay, well I need to know where on that scroll bar to get down to 272. But if you're in a 2-page design document, you don't really need page numbers. You don't need headers and footers and this is confidential and all these other cruft that you would have if you had printed documents. So really just use common sense and you'll be able to figure that out. Next video that we do, I'm just going to go through and I'm going to create a basic game design document and I'm going to show you some of the features in Word that let you do that quickly. That's for the next video. So that will specifically get into kind of the nitty-gritties of I'm not going to go into the basic things. This is Word. Hello, Word. But I am going to just kind of create a document and kind of show you how it works. And for all the people out there that need a template, then you can watch that video and you'll have your template because it'll be something that I'm making up on the spot. So for the rest of the week, this looks awfully similar to last week's. Actually, it's way too similar because it has discussion on there when it shouldn't be on there. So I'll take that off in the next video. But so you have the book, you have these videos. You don't have a discussion, you just have the play and comment. So hopefully the play and comment went well for you. Last week we got two new games this week, and hopefully they're pretty fun. I personally like everything that's on the play and comment list, so I'm going to be biased in that sense. And then at the end of the week we have a quiz that's specifically on Game design documentation. So take what you read and take what's going on in these videos, and if you understand that, then you'll be fine for the quiz. That's all I'm going to say on that. So if you have questions about this after you watch the next video, you know how to get a hold of me. But the next video is tied right into this one and should help illustrate some of these concepts. Game design documentation is kind of a big deal for designers. It's kind of how we show what we do, right? So artists have portfolios of art, and engineers have working examples of code, but designers don't have the kind of artifacts unless they're at the end of a game and they have a shipped game that says this was specifically my work and nobody else's. Insofar as the design goes, really the game design documentation is judged as the measure of the portfolio of the designer. The problem is that when you work for most places, your game design documentation, just as your art and code would be if you were an artist or design or programmer, ends up the property of whoever your employer is. So it tends to be something you can't really show around, but you can when you're a student because all of your stuff will be yours. But it ends up really being kind of the barometer of where you're at as a designer. So it's something you want to work at and make sure you're pretty good at. All right, so I will see you at the next video. Thanks.